Hey guys, what is happening? In today's video we are talking about Atlas Fallen. Before we jump into it, I am Falsa21. I love playing games and I love making videos, so if you guys like what you see, be sure to drop a like on the video and subscribe to the page. So Atlas Fallen is okay. I went into the game pretty open-minded and didn't really have any expectations of what the game was going to be. I literally just saw a couple trailers and I was like, that looks pretty cool. I do want to throw out a spoiler warning here, as there are some things that I do want to talk about that people might deem in spoiler territory, so here's your warning. The game actually reminds me a lot of Forspoken. There's a lot of similarities between the two. Both main characters are more or less nobodies who find magical gauntlet that gives them powers. And within that gauntlet is a powerful god that is trapped within inside and now are tasked with saving the world. Both games are pretty much solely carried by their combat, as pretty much anything outside of their combat is just not very good. The list goes on and on, but all in all, both games are very similar and have a lot in common. At least like when it comes to like the main beats of the story. In Atlas Fallen, you play as an unnamed. In this world, only the higher-ups and royalty are given real names, so pretty much everyone is named after what they do, as we get names like Tracker and Hunter and so forth. I don't know, I feel like we've seen this story already too many times, even earlier this year with Forspoken, and Atlas Fallen I don't think does enough to make it stand out from even Forspoken. Like, it's just so similar to even not only that, but many other media that are trying to do this same, random character with no powers thrust into a magical world and all of a sudden they got powers now. To make matters even worse, the voice acting for the game was just horrendous, not doing the game any favors. All in all, the voice acting I thought was just not very good. And actually the overall audio for the game wasn't good either. The sound effects just sounded weird and kind of muffled at times. And after booting up the game, it was literally the first thing I noticed. Another thing that I thought was a little bit strange was there was no cutscenes to give you, or any sort of indication to give you a sense of time. Other than the very beginning of the game, it is nighttime. But other than that, the game is pretty much solely during the day, and it was kind of hard to gear the sense of time. It literally felt like you did all of this in one day. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, there wasn't really many cutscenes in this game at all, which is not like a negative. I'm not saying that because you don't need to have cutscenes, but it just, at least to give you a sense of time of how long it's taking for things to happen, all these chain of events, they all kind of seem like they happen within a very short period of time. The one thing that I did think was rather decent was the gameplay. The gameplay here was decent, and the only thing that really keeps this game together. So basically, you're an unnamed who is like an earthbender, or pretty much like Gaara from Naruto. The gauntlet lets you control sand, and with it create sand weapons. 3 to be exact: a giant axe, bladed whip, and some sand gauntlet type things. These weapons don't do much damage on their own, but the more you attack, the more your momentum gauge builds up. And momentum is kind of the key here. It has 3 tiers or levels to it, and after you build it up to a certain tier, you're able to use a special move or ability. And that is one thing that I quite enjoyed, is that the gauntlet itself has quite a bit of buffs and abilities, special attacks that you can do that are all within certain tiers. And if I'm being honest, I really didn't use the 3rd tier all that much. There were some pretty cool abilities, especially when you're fighting a bunch of enemies or a hard boss. I really just opted to using the first 2 to building up that momentum, because after you use attack, your momentum drains back to 0. So it just seemed like it was too time consuming. By the time I actually got to land one of my tier 3 attacks, the fight was either already over or the boss was killing me too fast. You also heal with an item called relics, and each relic you can equip has different buffs and abilities. I didn't really get too much into it. Some of them give you a little bit boosted attack or better shatter points, things like that. I just opted to using the one that gave me an extra heal. Enemy variety I also thought was really great. All the enemies looked really cool and I thought were really well designed, very unique. I went to several different areas, and yeah, you would run into, the same occasional lower enemy, but I feel like there was enough variety here that I was always kind of running into something new. And each enemy is kind of cool because they each have their own weak points, or in the game they call them shatter points, and you have to take down all of these shatter points before you're able to finally take down the enemy. For instance, I fought this giant crab, and you have to take out both of its claws and its head at the same time, and I took out its head and now it's a crab with like no face, and it's got still like claws that it can attack you. So you have to take down all of the different parts before the monster goes down. As I mentioned earlier, there is a decent list of bosses in the game. All the boss fights were pretty decent overall, which all have multiple weak points and parts that you have to take down for the boss to go down. Along with all the story bosses, there's a bunch that you can just run into in the open world. I don't really have any complaints about the bosses. I thought they were overall decent. I don't think I really loved any of them or hated them, other than there's a couple bosses that fly, and all of those bosses were highly annoying. Other than that, I thought all the bosses were okay. So Atlas Fallen is open world, kind of, I think. There's several different locations that you can go to that all have like really big open parts, but it's not one cohesive open world where you can go from one end to the other. It's like big zones, and they're still big and open. As far as what you do in the world of Atlas Fallen, there are several like side missions and errands that you can do, but if I'm being completely honest, most of them were forgettable, and the rewards for doing so weren't all that great. I did a lot of the quest and errands fairly early on, like most of the ones you run into early game I did, but after a while, because the rewards just weren't all that great, I opted to just doing the ones that offered you gear, or I should say armor. Speaking of which, the game does have quite a few different armor sets, and I thought they all looked really cool. You could also totally customize what the color palette looks like, changing what the color of the armor, color of the cloth. All of that I thought was really cool, and just in general the armor looked really cool. There are also only 2 like puzzles in the game that you interact with while you're in the open world, and both more or less are kind of the same. The first is a timed crystal thing where you have to raise all of the crystals within a certain time limit, and the other is very similar, but you're jumping from platform to platform before they all disappear. Outside of those two things, the main thing that you're going to be doing for what seems like most of the game is searching for shards, or crystal shards. Literally every time you got an upgrade for your gauntlet, whether it's to do a double jump or to do an extra dash, you had to upgrade that same upgrade you got 3 times. So it's kind of, I don't know, it just was kind of annoying. It's like, oh, I got this cool upgrade. Now you need to upgrade that piece 3 times before you can equip it. And I felt like that's what I did for most of the game, is finding shards, which I personally thought was super annoying. Like, don't call it an upgrade if I have to go find 3 pieces to equip this upgrade. As I mentioned, there really isn't a whole lot to do in the open world. You can explore. They have like these beast-like meadow things, I forget what the game calls it, where you can sneak up on an elk and watch where it goes. It kind of like lights up gold for a little bit and it'll reveal a treasure. None of the treasures were really all that great. I did them when I ran across them, but I didn't actively go out searching for them. Other than that, there's just a bunch of side missions and errands that you can run into. There is quite a bit of, I don't even know what you'd call them, just bosses in the open world, where you're just cruising along and all of a sudden there's this giant crab you gotta take out, or another giant like dragon looking thing. So a lot of really big open world bosses. I thought they were all fine, like I mentioned earlier, but other than that, there's just really not much to do in the open world. Although I will say that the traversal was quite fun. I really liked sand surfing. Last thing that I do want to talk about is the game's performance. I played Atlas Fallen on the PlayStation 5 and I had quite a few frame drops. It was very inconsistent. I also had the game hard crash on me twice. Once was just in a menu screen, which I thought was really weird because I was just a menu and then all of a sudden it was frozen. Had to totally reboot the, everything. I also had gotten stuck in between a few like walls and cracks, stuff like that while exploring. But probably the most annoying bug I had was in a few story moments where I had to beat a boss. And the area that you're in, there's like this, wall that kind of traps you in of the boss arena. And I took down the boss, and that wall never went down, and so I was kind of stuck, and I couldn't escape. And the only thing I could do was and it saved right there too, so quitting out and restarting the game literally appeared you right in the same boss arena with the wall still up. So I had to go back to a previous save. The other time was when I was fighting a boss, and that boss was guarding like a shard for your gauntlet to upgrade, and I had beaten the boss, but when I went up to go grab this shard, there was no icon to grab it, and I think it was press triangle to grab things, and that triangle never popped up for me, so I had to restart. No matter how many times I left and came back, it wouldn't work. The only thing I could do was go back to a previous save, which was really annoying, having to redo everything. Like I said, both of which resulted in me having to restart from a checkpoint. With that said, the game was not a full price game and was only $50. And depending on your tolerance for a lot of these bugs and glitches, might vary person to person. Overall, I think Atlas Fallen is okay. And honestly, I feel like the only thing that keeps this game together is the combat. The story, I just don't feel like the story is good enough to make it really stand out or memorable. There wasn't enough new with it to make it interesting. The combat was, I felt like, decent. I wouldn't say that it is super great, but it was fun, and also the performance overall wasn't that good, as well as the voice acting I thought was not very good, especially Niall, or whatever the god's name is that is inside your gauntlet. He was just annoying. I don't know how else to put it. Didn't like him at all. And that is why overall I'm going to give Atlas Fallen a 6 out of 10. Even though the game is not a full price game, I would still say that if you're on the fence about it and it still looks interesting to you, I would just say wait for a sale. It's August now, Black Friday is coming up in November. I'm sure you can snag this game for 20 bucks. If you see that, I would say by all means go for it. I feel like it has enough flaws in it that would justify waiting for a purchase. That's going to be it for the video. If you made it this far, you guys are freaking awesome. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll catch you guys on the next video.